Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lee Hind. I work for PAVS as the regional lead for digital time banking, but I also hold a brief with them in terms of safeguarding as well. So today's session is very short, very simple, and I do apologise in advance if this is teaching you to suck eggs in somewhat. We put this together a little while ago, and actually when I delivered it to Pembrokeshire Network, it was probably a little bit late, but we've put this stuff together just for you to be aware of some of the things that you might come up against in terms of safeguarding when you are working as part of a community group or a mutual aid group or something like that. We've got a few people here as already, so I'm just going to get people, there's only a few, we'll just get people to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Jamie to my left.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm volunteer community development officer for PAVS.
Sarah?
Oh, I'm Sarah. I'm development support officer and funding advisor for PAVS.
Jackie?
Okay, so I'm Jackie. I work as a health and wellbeing coordinator for PAVS and am the safeguarding officer for PAVS as well.
Cool, good. Ruth?
Hiya, I work for Llanedi Community Council. I'm a community development officer, part-time.
Magic. And Tom?
I think he's muted.
He's definitely muted.
Sorry, it just takes a while to get to the button. I have to try and find it, but I think you know me all already.
Cool. Okay, so the way this will work then, I've broken it down into a few sections: safeguarding of self, safeguarding of cash, safeguarding of isolating clients or neighbours, things that some support networks can do to enhance safeguarding, and then a little word on DPS checks at the end. The way we ran it in Pembrokeshire was relatively successful. It's just for me to yabber on for 5 to 10 minutes and just to cover off some of the things that we've said, and then I will happily answer as many questions as you've got. So if we start with the safeguarding of self, and when I say that, I'm talking about the volunteers that are working primarily on the front line with community support networks, mutual aid groups, and so on. Hugely important area, because we want volunteers to obviously to be able to continue to volunteer and to continue to help other people. We also want to ensure that no volunteers' families are put at risk by their volunteering action. So, you know, very, very simply, I guess, the first point is about safeguarding yourself against infection, and that is about following Public Health Wales guidelines at all times. There should be a 2-metre physical distance between you and others at all times. That's other volunteers, people that you're helping, whoever's there. I was in a meeting yesterday with some colleagues. In fact, it was Jackie that raised this, and I'm going to credit Jackie with it. I love the term physical distancing, to maintain a 2-metre physical distance rather than social distancing, because actually we should continue to be social as we get through this, but maintain a physical distance. If you're delivering shopping, prescriptions, food parcels, that sort of thing, and I'm assuming at this point that there isn't an endless supply of gloves for each volunteer to be changing their gloves every time they go and deliver. So to wash or sanitize hands after every delivery. When we raised this up in Pembrokeshire, people were like, "What, do you want us to take water in the car?" Yeah, I do. I want you to take water in the car. I want you to take a bit of soap in the car. And I want you to wash your hands. You can use hand sanitizer if you like. Make sure it's a 70% concentration at minimum, because that is the concentration that is effective against viruses. If you're giving lifts to people as part of this, then the client always sits in the back of the car. And after every journey, then a sanitization needs to take place: door handles, seat belts, anything else that's been touched by the client during that journey, all needs to be washed down. These are similar guidelines that have been put in place for taxi drivers as well. And the back of the car thing just maintains as much of the physical distance as we can in a car setting. It's obviously impossible for completely 2 meters unless you've got a massive car. And then all deliveries that you are taking to people's houses are left on the doorstep, the door knocked, and then you retreat 2 meters. As a general rule of thumb, you shouldn't be crossing the threshold of anybody's house at this stage. in terms of helping them out. I don't know about you guys, we struggled for a long time in terms of safeguarding of cash, when we were thinking about how volunteers were working with people and how they could support people. And I guess it's very simple to say that wherever possible, card payment should be used. And that is about possibly negotiating with the shops themselves about, oh, excuse me 1 second, we just have met some people, Paris and Eleanor. Yeah, so card payments should be used. However, we were able to negotiate with some local shops. Hiya guys, sorry about the hoo-ha in terms of getting started. I have already started because people had other meetings at 2 o'clock, but I am more than happy to, this is recorded actually, so we'll show you the recording afterwards. So yeah, sorry, we negotiated with some shops around taking card payments, and some local stores have actually started to do this for us, even though they didn't previously. So it might be worth a conversation with your local shop. If cash must be used, then cash should be left in a money bag or an envelope, and a photo taken of the list for the items and the cash by the volunteer when they pick it up. And after they've done the shopping trip, then a photo of the receipt and the change as it's left in a money bag back on the doorstep with that person. It's not foolproof, this, in terms of safeguarding of cash. It is much, much better if people can use card, use contactless, that sort of thing. Obviously the contactless limit has been raised to £45 now instead of 30, so that makes life a little bit easier. But yeah, it is an area where local coordinator knowledge of people, of practice of places will really come to the fore. In terms of isolating, safeguarding of self-isolating clients, neighbours, people like that, it's always nice actually if people, volunteers, can ask if anything else is needed, and importantly how that person is feeling when they're dropping something off. It's a really simple thing, but there's a lot of potential loneliness and isolation out there at the moment. And, you know, obviously maintaining a 2 meter physical distance, but you could be making someone's day by having a little conversation with them. You know, we just don't know how long people have been left alone. Certainly we're anecdotally aware of some people not seeing people from 1 week to the next. So it's an important element of the work that we're doing. Obviously, we can offer to signpost to all sorts of different groups, other groups that are still providing services. I'm, again, not sure about Carmarthenshire, but in Pembrokeshire, some mental health services, some counselling services, some other providers have started to offer online provision, booking appointments to talk to people and things like that. Telephone befriending is something that's taken off quite well, and I know that those offers exist on the Connected Carmarthenshire site, certainly. Jack? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Just to let you know that we actually have a couple of our telephone befrienders in this room right now. So, yeah, we're offering the service through PAVS in Carmarthenshire. Fantastic. So anybody who you know wants to call, then I've got befrienders waiting to give to call people.
Fantastic, thank you, Jack. Good to have you guys here. I know that the befriending service in Pembrokeshire has been really well used and well appreciated, and I'm sure it's the same over there. Just something to be aware of in terms of people that you might be helping. Be aware that there's been a roughly 40% drop in calls to domestic abuse helplines and reports of domestic abuse. And similarly, I strongly feel that there hasn't been a 40% drop in the number of cases or the number of incidents. So it may be that people are just not able to call and not able to access help, just for volunteers to be able to keep an eye out for any telltale signs and to be able to report those back to coordinators, and then for coordinators to be able to perhaps make referrals to other services. And similarly, for people who are going near other people's homes, not across the threshold, but near, if you've got concerns about abuse or neglect or anything like that, and it could be neglect of self, it could be imposed on other people, but if you have concerns from anything that you see, you take your concerns to a group admin, the group admins that have been set up will know where to take those inquiries and those concerns. Some of the things then that support networks can do to enhance safeguarding, basically, I mean, the first one again is really simple, but it's making sure that isolated people know who is coming when that person is coming, and it's ideally at what time. Just to give them as much information as possible to make sure that they're not concerned about opening the door to the wrong person. If you can identify them in some way, I mean, I'm not sure in Carmarthenshire, in Pembrokeshire, some groups have issued volunteer IDs, lanyards and so on to their volunteers, so that they can both identify themselves to isolating people, but also to identify themselves to the police if they stop them while they're out and about. If you don't have that facility and you haven't done that, maybe, you know, he's driving a blue car, he's wearing a green jacket, something like that, to identify the fact that this person is the person that they're expecting to turn up at their house. Groups and support networks then need to have a clear process in place for if a safeguarding concern is raised. Now, this is the sort of work that PAVS, CAVS, CAVO, etc. would do all the time with constituted groups. It's much more difficult, or it's been much more difficult for us to reach some of the mutual aid and support networks that have set up. These have come up very quickly, very enthusiastic people running them, doing good things. But we do need to make sure that if safeguarding concerns are coming up out in the community, that those networks have got a route to report those. And obviously, you know, CAVS can help with that, but it is important. I'm not suggesting something as formal as a policy or anything like that, but certainly know people that know what to do if a volunteer raises a concern. Just a word then on DBS checks. We've spoken lots about this in Pembrokeshire, but generally speaking, the position that we've come to is that generally speaking, the type of volunteering that's going on in these support networks and in these mutual aid groups does not qualify for a DBS check, either standard or enhanced at the moment. You can get a basic check. Anyone can get a basic check. They can apply for that themselves, but a basic check will only show unspent convictions. It's not the most useful check that they issue. What we found is that some of the volunteers in our support groups are DBS checked from another role, from a job that from their day job possibly, and it may be that you want to assign jobs that involve cash handling or something like that, specifically to those volunteers, to give an extra layer of confidence in the work. If you feel, though, that a task that you've been asked to do, because let's face it, community support networks are being asked to do kind of all sorts of different things depending on the needs of the people that they're working with. But if you feel that the task that you've been asked to do does meet the requirements for a DBS check, you're encouraged to contact CAVS really and to check that out. With people. There's also a really good checker on gov.uk. If you type DBS eligibility checker into Google, it'll pop up, and you can enter the tasks that person will do, and it'll spit back out whether or not a DBS check is appropriate. That's broadly all I want to say initially, but I am more than happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Okay, Lee, I'm going to kick off with something because I'm going to have to leave in a few moments because because I've got another meeting to go to. But one of the things for me is making sure that, you know, you spoke very briefly about neglect, abuse, you know, and also about domestic violence, and you know, one of the key things for me is also about children, and how do we recognize those signs and symptoms of neglect, abuse. You know, sometimes it's not visible, but I think what we need to be clear on is that, you know, volunteers are in this position where they are going to people's homes, they are maybe distanced, or they're on the phone. You know, they're on the phone and you can hear how distressed somebody is. So it's like, could you talk a little bit more around those areas of abuse so that people have like a little touch into that?
Yeah, it is tricky. There's no two ways about that. Like you say, the volunteers that you are working with might be going to homes that they've not seen before. These might be volunteers who've never had any child protection training or anything like that. So it will be difficult for some of those volunteers either to identify abuse or neglect when they see it, or for them to have a suspicion or a concern that they're not quite sure about because they haven't quite seen enough to form a proper opinion. And what I would say about that is that it's about making sure the volunteers are well supported. And primarily the first and foremost area of support will be from the community support network themselves. So what I would say is it is for community support network coordinators to make sure that they're not sending volunteers out with no information, that they are saying, if you see anything that concerns you, and I always go back to, it was years ago in a safeguarding session where somebody said to me, the rule of thumb is, if you see something that you are concerned about, because if this was a member of your family, you would be concerned, then that is something that you need to raise with somebody else. And you don't need training to understand that. You just need to know that you would be concerned if this was a member of your family. So, I mean, it's not going to be possible for us to roll out training or anything like that to the huge number of volunteers that have come forward, but it is about making sure that the volunteers have a route back to their coordinators in the first instance.
That's great, thank you. I think we all can get quite frightened about reporting people. Reporting either somebody who's abusing, standing in a shopping queue hitting their children, or those people we suspect of. And there we are working with some very, very vulnerable people out there right now. Those people that we maybe not even have much contact with because of the rurality of West Wales. So we may be, like you say, the only person that they speak to or see potentially for the whole week or fortnight, whatever that is. I'd also like to go back to the cash handling thing, because we're getting issues right now, just with regards to people not, well, the old adage of keeping all your money under your bed or in your washing machine or whatever, and actually you've run out of it now, you've run out of that money, so you need to get your pension. So it's that scenario where people maybe need to have somebody to go and get their pension because they're shielded or they're over 70. It's that scenario.
It's now, especially if that pension is highly likely, I would guess, to be paid into a bank account. So there'll be a card access maybe, or could be, I mean, sorry, how are you imagining they're getting this pension?
So pension is still paid. The little old lady or little old gentleman would take a trip out once a week to go and get their pension from the post office.
With a book? They still do that?
Yeah, they still do that, yes.
Oh, okay.
But also you've got that adage of those people not being able to go get to a cash machine, etc. So you've got a couple of scenarios there. In the tiny villages where there's a little local post office or something, they still actually, even in Swansea, they still go and get their pension from the post office. So.
Okay. What I would say is, if there is a need to go and get a pension with a pension book, I would exhaust every possibility before I gave that pension book to someone else. So a family member, first and foremost, ideally. Obviously, not everyone has got family living near them or with them. A DBS checked volunteer, I guess, is the next stage. I'd like to see, if it were possible, that person being taken to the post office with a volunteer driving them, as we've already described, in the back, etc. Not only is that more secure because the person gets to get their own pension, but also that person gets out of the house, even if it's only for 5 or 10 minutes. And that's a positive thing, whether they recognise it or not. It's a positive thing for their well-being. So yeah, I mean, these are case-by-case things. Often easier actually in smaller communities where people know everybody and the postmaster knows everybody, and it's, these can be sorted out through personal relationships. And I think what we've seen, certainly in Pembrokeshire over the course of this whole COVID-19 thing, has been the number of people who are in real need of external support hasn't been as great as we anticipated that it would. Communities, families have coalesced around people and ensured that they have got some of the things that they need. So, which is a really good thing. It's a really positive thing.
Thank you, that's really great. I'm going to have to leave now, unfortunately, because I do have another meeting to go to, but my colleagues are here, and you know, if you do have any queries or concerns, then I'm at the end of an email usually, or at the end of a phone, if you've got my phone number, which some of you do. All right, thanks everybody.
Cheers, Jackie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Absolutely, far away.
So I'm not sure if you're aware, but I'm the director of People Speak Up. So yes, we've been helping PAVS with a group of volunteers for the befriending, but obviously we're running a lot of our projects now. Well, all our projects are mainly digital. And I was just asking to see if you've got any advice with regards to safeguarding on Zoom.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. When we first started using Zoom, we were told by a number of different people that it was unsafe, that it was insecure. We did a little bit of research around it, and it does seem to have been patched, certainly by Zoom themselves, a couple of weeks after this all started. So I think that the security issues that some of the people were talking about in terms of people being able to access meetings and so on are less prevalent than they were. I don't want to say that it's not happening anymore. There's the option I noticed as I'm the host of this, and there's an option to lock the meeting. I would suggest that once you've got everybody in your meeting, then you do that. You lock the meeting. It prevents what I'm told is called Zoom bombing, where people come into your meeting.
Where's that?
Right. So when you're the host, I don't think you can do that when you're not the host. But when you're the host, or you could ask the host certainly to do it. So as I'm looking at this screen now, I've got obviously videos of all you lovely people in front of me, and then a list of participants down the right-hand side. At the bottom there, I've got mute all, unmute all, for if I want to keep it all quiet. And then just to the right of that, I've got 3 dots. And if you click that 3 dots, it gives various options about enabling the waiting room. And the last one of those is lock the meeting.
Brilliant.
So I would encourage people to do that if they're having a closed meeting, is to wait for everyone to get there, then lock it. And that's a really good way of making sure that people can't Zoom bomb you. Obviously, in terms of online security and safety, is all the standard stuff about not revealing too much personal information, about being wary. Certainly if you can't see people that you're talking to, do you know that you're talking to that person? That sort of thing to be aware of in this new normal of video conferencing. But yeah, it's some basic stuff, but that lock the meeting just to make sure that you're safe and secure in your little space is first and foremost.
And just to follow on from that as well, so Caris, my colleague, is here as well. One of the other because we're working with a lot of young people, and funny enough, we just had a referral from Pembrokeshire this morning actually.
Okay.
But we want to do small WhatsApp video groups. We were doing it, but then I had an issue of whereas Caris is with a volunteer, and then she's with possibly 2 young people, because it's 4 at a time in WhatsApp. Yeah. How does everybody feel about the fact, so if it's 1 member of staff, 1 volunteer and 2 young people, because there's not 2 members of staff, but she's there with a volunteer, how do you feel on that one?
The volunteer is yours though, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, so in PAVS, we refer to volunteers as members of staff. The only difference is they're not paid. So they're subjected to all your terms and conditions, they're to all of your policies, procedures, that sort of thing. And they've been inducted appropriately, I'm guessing. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah.
In that case, you've got 2 members of staff in that room.
Brilliant.
So I would caution against having groups where there's only 1 member of staff in there. The only real way to get around that would be to record that, and I don't know whether you can do that in a WhatsApp group. I'm not savvy enough to know, I'm sorry. But if you've got a member of staff and a volunteer, then I would suggest you could probably have 5, 6, 7, 8 young people in that group, much the same way as you would do the ratio if this was offline, you know? and to try and treat it like that. I'm not familiar with WhatsApp groups, so I'm not sure about the issue of Zoom bombing or whether that's feasible within a WhatsApp group. Gareth, do you know?
I don't think you can do that because there's a maximum of only 4 people in the chat. So there's no way of it. Yeah, because it's done by mobile phone numbers rather than a code.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. I feel old now. In that case, then, you know, if you've only got 4 people, you've got a staff member and a volunteer, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever.
Is there anything I've missed there, Caris, with regards to Zoom and with the young people?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Great, thank you.
Just a word on young people. We have had a huge, a higher than expected spike in the numbers of young people who have been negatively affected in terms of mental health by this process. And I think people generally felt that young people would be able to sort this out and they'd be able to deal with it a lot better. Actually, I'm not really sure that that's the case, and certainly some young people that we've spoken to have been really struggling. So nice one, guys.
Yeah.
Keep that up. That's amazing.
Yeah, just to add on to that, because we work with young people and older people and lots of intergenerational work. And I thought going into this that it would have been, but it's actually completely the opposite. And we're actually expanding our services now for our younger people. So we've got weekly sessions and holiday sessions all starting up, and 2 different groups for 2 different age groups as well, because we can't really cope with the demand. So I'm in the process of organising all of that with Caris at the moment. Then I'll make sure Jackie gets all that information so it can be sent out to all the networks.
Yeah, I mean, you could use Zoom with those guys if you wanted to expand the numbers. You know, obviously with you need obviously a few members of staff in there as well, or volunteers or whatever. But yeah, that can be run just as an offline group would. And I think it's fantastic that services are adapting the way that they deliver at the moment. It's amazing.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go as well, but I've just got one comment, Lee.
Yes.
You commented that in Pembrokeshire, you know, the strength of rural communities has been, has highlighted. But I'm also from a very rural area where people imply, you know, we already have the support networks, we don't need anything else. But I think it's worth saying, you know, have you got a plan if somebody does fall ill? Because they're kind of assuming that they're covered, and so I think volunteers need to look out for when somebody does fall ill, what are the knock-on consequences?
Yeah, absolutely. And as well as that, I mean, one of the issues that we came up with was in a very, very small community in Pembrokeshire, we had a couple of 70-year-olds, 70 plus, volunteering, you know, wanting to go to shops, take stuff to people. Of course, the guidance is that 70-year-olds need to be self-isolating and shielding. And well, let's just say they weren't best pleased when that was suggested to them. And, you know, a bit of old blitz spirit and we can cope with this, thank you very much, because they want to stay involved with their communities. But I think it's about making sure that there are a number of different opportunities out there. So there are things that 70-plus-year-olds can do to help groups, but that doesn't involve going outside. So, you know, crafting, mask making, administration for the groups, telephone befriending, all of those things can be easily achieved by those people. I guess the issue with very small rural communities, you're absolutely right, is they do tend to look out for each other more generally anyway. And I guess that's the reason why we started off with, in the first tranche, we had like 55 groups, and then we had 65, and then we had 70 odd, and now we've got 85, because we're picking up these little groups piece by piece and just basically saying to them, you know, we're here to help you, here to support you. You don't have to take anything from us, but it's there if you need it. And most groups then tend to sign up and at least give us an email address so we can keep in touch.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I've got to go.
No worries. Thank you very much. Take care.
How do I leave?
Any more for any more questions, comments, anything like that?
I think one of the things that we always recommend, certainly with the small groups, is that when you're working with volunteers, to look at maybe pairing them up and using a buddy system, because as Sarah rightly said, you know, if somebody becomes unwell and then there's a very small network of people relying on that volunteer, maybe a street that they're living in, that there is always more than one person to fall back on. So minimum of 2. You know, if you can do 3, even better.
It's yeah, we did suggest that. I remember doing it in a safeguarding session, and somebody said social distancing. Hello. So we've got to be mindful of that as well. Volunteers can't be seen to be walking down the street together.
Oh no. Yeah, I mean, it could just be communicating, at least having 2 people that you can be in contact with if you need support, and if that one
good
person
Lord. Yeah. Sorry,
isn't
yeah,
available.
I misunderstood. I misunderstood what you were saying then. It's like, yeah,
we're not having separate parties.
No, you're absolutely right. Having more than one contact in the group, making sure that people are aware of that. It's also good for groups to resend some of the stuff that we found that groups sent out, obviously leaflets or cards or whatever to their local communities to say, this is the number, phone if you need help and so on. But actually when we did that a second time, they got more people coming back, because I think it was either the first time they saw it was like, oh, actually we're fine, we don't need anything. But the second time they saw it, oh, well, actually maybe we could do with something. Or whether they had a full cupboard the first time but didn't the second, I'm not sure. But we did find a little pickup when we did it the second time.
Yeah, and situations change. And I think one of the other things we've also been kind of promoting is that, you know, the organisers, the coordinators, the admins of these groups, you know, from a safeguarding perspective, they need to share the load as well. Because otherwise you find yourself in a situation where, you know, you might have 100, 200 volunteers. Some groups have said they've got 400. And if you just have one person who is coordinating all of that, then this becomes a full-time job. And obviously we are looking at mental health. We're looking at people's ability to actually put this down at the end of the day, especially when you're in some of, you know, our smaller communities. You know, typically, you know, we do want to try and do as much as we possibly can for each other, but that can become burden. Oh God, I can't say the word. Burdensome. Thank you.
No,
so
I understand
it's about
completely.
sharing that load and just having someone else to talk to. And I think that's possibly where some of these, where our community connect groups have come in Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion and Carmarthenshire. So at least, you know, the groups can come together to support each other and to have support from PAVS and other professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important. And the bigger groups that we've got have got 3, 4, 5 coordinators within them. Some of the smaller ones have only got 1 or 2. But as far as I know, I haven't come across any group that's only got 1 so far. It's not to say they don't exist. I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, I think perhaps with, because obviously we're not just talking about Facebook, you know, we're talking about some WhatsApp groups that are in maybe a street or a small village. Yeah, it's just encouraging them really to not take it all on themselves.
Yeah, I think overall, is a big picture, it's been amazing to see the level of community action that's happened since we were locked down. I don't think anyone in PAVS predicted the just sheer proliferation of people wanting to help, people who've never volunteered before offering to do things. It'd be really good to keep some of that momentum actually as we're going forward, if we can. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Just quickly, it's more a comment than a question, really. I just before this, I was on a another Skype thing with One Voice Wales, where they had the sort of politicians more or less talking about, you know, well, there's this wonderful resource now we've sort of seen come to the fore, and how do we make sure that we keep some of this community spirit, if you like, going forward. And it was interesting that a lot of people were saying, well, you know, it's been so streamlined, it's been so responsive, there hasn't been a lot of red tape around it, or the minimum of red tape. And while safeguarding you know, it is one issue we're all aware of and are mindful of. How, you know, it's about empowering the people as well. They felt that they've been making the decisions rather than another organisation was saying to them, well, you come and work with us and we'll do this, that and the other. And I thought that was really, you know, a really valid point, really. I mean, I come from a community council background, and we've had some success with volunteers in the past, but this seems to really caught people's spirit. And I think VE Day and all the rest of it has kind of added to that, you know, the spirit or whatever you call it, you know, it's sort of all added to that. And I just think it's interesting, really, that the politicians are starting to think, well, how can we put things in place that enable people to volunteer within their communities, you know, in this kind of way, in this more flexible, more responsive way, really. I don't know if anybody's got any further thoughts on that. Go on, go.
I was going to say, I think people have got the time, haven't they? The big difference is more people are volunteering because they're not working and they feel they want to give something back. In my experience, anyway. And perhaps now that because people have had a taste of it, then more people will do it when they go back to work, you know.
Yep, I think certainly this glut of informal volunteering that's gone on has given people an opportunity they perhaps didn't have before, or as you say, Elena, they didn't have the time for before. But they still get that good feeling when they volunteer, you know, the one that we know about and all the rest of it that we try and bottle and sell to people to convince them to volunteer. So they've had that experience now. And there are things happening around informal volunteering to try and capture some of that and to try and keep the kind of message alive that this sort of help is needed all the time. It's been especially needed during COVID-19, but actually people always need checking on, people always need a lift to the shops, people always need someone to walk their dog when they come out of hospital, all of that sort of stuff. So we are working on some things. You've got the Connect 2 platforms in Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion now, which is really good. And hopefully those can be used as a mechanism to capture some of this informal stuff. But actually, what I really hope is that some of these support networks that have popped up carry on. Whether they carry on, they don't necessarily need to carry on as support networks, but to carry on as community groups and possibly lead on initiatives and projects in their own area.
The other thing I was just going to touch on as well, and then I'll shut up. In a PAVS Connecting Network session that we had the other day, we were talking about, you know, well, starting to get people to think about post-COVID, if you like, and you know, because a lot of us who sort of recruited COVID volunteers, you know, have been under the sort of premise of, you know, oh, well, you know, with the data protection and everything else, you've got to be very careful how you handle people's information. So starting to get those people to sort of actually come forward and say, yeah, I do want to do other volunteering going forward. So inspired by our chat the other day, Jamie, you'll be pleased to hear, I did a little poll on our volunteer Facebook group, and already people are coming forward and saying, yeah, I'd be interested in environmental volunteering or intergenerational volunteering and this type of thing. So I'm starting to be able to capture those people now before they all, you know, disappear back to work or whatever it is. And so now I can say legitimately, I can go back to them in the future and say, well, look, we've got this fantastic project coming off. Are you still interested? So it was really useful that was brought up at that meeting, because it kind of, I kind of thought of it, but it actually made me do something about it. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. That's really, really cool.
Sorry, we're gonna have to go, sorry. But
that's
thank
all right.
you.
I think we're close enough to the end now anyway. Thank you for your input, thank you for your questions. And obviously PAVS are there if you've got any immediate questions.
Yeah, really informative. Thanks everybody. Bye.
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 Okay, there we are. I think we're about there, are we? Oh,
thank you, Lee.
It's just me and you, mate.
You better press the off button for the record then.
Oh yeah, right. So if I stop the recording, do you want to stop cloud recording?